Hello and welcome everybody to Lunch and Learn. I'm going to wait just a couple of minutes before we get started to let folks filter in and join before we kick it off officially.
Hey, hello.
Hey, John, how are
Can you
you?
hear me? Hey, all good.
I can hear you.
Okay. So I wanted to ask a quick question about something. I was here yesterday as well.
Hey,
Found a way
John,
to. Yep.
could you give me 1 second actually before you start off with that question? We're going to get to you first. You'll definitely be first in line. But before we do start, I wanted to mention one thing about our documentation site and just generally introduce Lunch and Learn real quick. So I'll be back to you in just a minute. But to
Yep.
start, I just wanted to welcome everybody to Lunch and Learn. My name is Matt. I'm going to be the moderator for today. So what Lunch and Learn is a platform for anyone to be able to come in and ask questions, decisions questions to decisions people. So it's really for anyone to join in and ask any kind of question you have. The format is like this. You can join in and raise your hand just like John did, and we will unmute you and you're able to voice your question. Or alternatively, you can type it into the Zoom chat. Thirdly, if you'd like, you can pre-submit questions. It's fairly simple. As you're registering for the Lunch and Learn, there's a form. And on that form, there's a questions and comments section. If you fill that out with a question, we will be able to look over that question beforehand and possibly come prepared with an answer. And obviously, you'll be sure your question gets answered that way. These Lunch and Learns happen Monday through Thursday at noon Eastern time. And before we get started today, I wanted to do a quick announcement, and maybe you all have heard this before, but there's a new feature on our documentation site that I wanted to announce, and I'll probably, this may get announced more than once, so if you've heard this already, just sit tight. But that new feature is this: there's a way to suggest edits directly through our doc site. So if you're looking through a document and you think, oh, something's missing, or it doesn't make sense, or you think there's a good thing that could be added to a document, at the bottom right-hand corner on all of our documents now, there's a suggest edit button. If you click that button, it brings up this form. All you need to do is fill out your email address. You do need to have an account on our customer portal in order to do this, but that's easy to get set up as well. You can just email support@decisions.com if you don't have a customer portal account. You fill out your email, the suggestion, attach any screenshots you like. This form will automatically capture what document you're suggesting on, as well as the document title. Hit submit, and that will get reviewed by our documentation team. Anyway, back to Lunch and Learn and John's question. Sorry for interrupting you with that, but back to you, John. Feel free to kick it off with your question.
Hey, yeah, no problem. That's great. This new feature makes sense. Sometimes I can find some things on documentation, so I can suggest if something maybe is missing there.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so yesterday I asked something related to, I had two tables, two data grids that I would need to relate one to the other one. Basically, there were a data grid with locations and then another data grid with line items. Each line item has a related location. So what I wanted to be able to do is basically when you clicked on one of the rows of the locations, refresh the table below with the line items for that specific location you clicked on. But the problem I got with this, they explained me the way to do it, and I use a data flow to refresh and call the API to refresh the table below and all that. But the problem I had with that way is that this way is refreshing the table, and I think it wouldn't maintain, correct me if I'm wrong, but it wouldn't maintain if I edit any values on the line items table, because the table, let's call it table A and table B, okay? So table B has some inputs that I'm able to inline edit, and then you click on save changes, and that calls a flow and does some stuff with these completed inputs on the table. But if I click on table, one of the things on table E and refresh the table below, probably I will lose if I completed any things on the inline edit. So it's like I'm more used to programming, not decisions. It's like 6 months, I think I've been working with decisions. So to call it like using web programming, it's basically the difference between refreshing the server or refreshing by client side. What I need to do is client side, just like a simple filter. You click on the location, and then filters only the line items of that specific location. So I thought that maybe a better way to do this is use an advanced data grid and add the filter there, because on the line items table, I already have a location field. So I could just filter by that number, and the user can complete the number there on an input and filter those. That makes sense. I could do it that way.
Yeah, I think I understand what you're trying to do. It sounds like you've got a list of locations. You want to click a location, and once you've clicked a location, you want the related orders or line items to appear for that location.
Yeah, because the line items below have one of the columns is the location. It's basically a number. And so when you click on one of the locations in the data grid above, I want to refresh the table of line items to filter only the line items of that specific location, but not refresh it really, but just filter it. And if I just remove the filters, go back to all the locations, all the line items, sorry, and maintain, if I edit anything on inline in those line items, maintain those values, because I want the user to play with clicking locations or removing locations just for a filter way, and then they click on save changes and save everything that has been completed on the line items table, you know?
Mm-hmm. So this actually, in your UI, there's a way to edit each line item in this.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not an action. It's directly an inline edit. You get two columns there on that line items table that have an input, and when you click on the combination of row column, you click there, and it would let you edit and put a number there. It's basically a add or remove quantity. You complete whatever you want on the row you want, and then you click on save changes. So I want that works perfectly, works fine and everything. I just want the user to be able to look for line items of a specific location first, then click on another location and complete line items of each location they want time by time, you know, but then save everything along. So I will need to maintain the values when they click on a location or remove the filter. Always maintain the things they have edited on the table.
So, okay, so your main ask is you want it so that when they click a different location, everything that they edited on the previously selected location is saved automatically?
No, not save automatically, but maintain it on the form.
I see.
If they go back to the previous location, they would see what they have completed, and when they click on save changes, it would send along all the things, all the line items, no matter which location they have clicked.
I see. Okay, that is certainly doable. It sounds like, okay, so the proper the way that this should actually function is that you can make all of these edits in the form, select whatever location, and nothing is actually persisted to the database until they click save on that main form.
That's correct. That's correct.
Yeah, having that functionality is certainly possible. Doing that requires building the flow and your, you mentioned the active form flow in a way that makes that happen. So the pattern that you'd have to use to do this, if you're using a flow, is you would fetch all the data from the database, display that on your form, the location form where you can actually make those selections. And your data flows, sorry, I'm calling it data flow, but I think you mentioned you're using an active form flow. Is that right?
What do you mean, an active form?
On the form that you're talking about with the locations, in order to populate the line item data grid.
Yeah, there is a main flow which has a call to two different subflows inside. One of these gets me the locations, and the other one gets me the line items separately, calling two different APIs. And then the outputs of these two subflows goes as inputs to the form, and then opens the form and populates the form directly receives the array with locations and line items to populate the two data grids. So I just want the user to also be able to filter the line items table by location. That's the only thing I need to add.
Okay, so are you saying the only thing that you actually need to add is the ability to do that filtering?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
But I'm using a simple data grid, so I don't know if to use filters. I would need to remove to remove the data grid I'm using for line items and add an advanced data grid instead, and remake everything using an advanced one. And besides, I'm using version 6 just in case.
Okay, that is good to know. All right, so to do that filtering, I can probably create just a quick example of that. I don't know that I'll be able to touch on specifically how to make sure you're not persisting anything to the database until you hit save. But I could go through this example of, the idea of like a parent-child report on a form.
Yeah, basically, I will need to be able to have two grids, and then when you click on the grid above, update the grid below, like filter, just the filter. I just want that to be able to happen. Then all the save changes stuff is working properly, so I think that wouldn't affect the other things.
Okay. Well, I'm going to do a very simple example, and I think it'll help make sure I'm answering the right question. You basically have, do you have a form with two data grids on it?
Yeah, I can share right here.
I actually don't know. Is that something?
Unfortunately, no, we can't share screen on the webinar.
Okay, I didn't think so. So I'll have to build out this example.
Yep. So it's basically, two data grids. The first one with only locations. You can put like ID and description, just the simple stuff. And then the other one, the other items we got on the second data grid have, for instance, ID, description, and related location.
Got it. I'm going to do an example just using our folder type. That's an easy one to use as an example for parent-child reports. In this case, it is parent-child because like a folder can contain other folders. In your case, it's sort of parent-child because a location, quote unquote, contains those line items. But the pattern would be the same.
Yep, perfect.
So if you can correct me if I'm wrong, but on the left-hand side here, you would have a selection of, in this case, folders. You pick one, and on the right-hand side, it'll display the folders within that folder. In your case, the left-hand side would be location, the right-hand side being line items.
The line items. Yep, that's perfect.
Okay. Okay, so let me configure this data grid real quick. Oh, it's already got all these columns. I really think I'm going to clear all and add just name. And you said you're using regular data grids, like not advanced data grids?
Yeah, the normal data grids for both locations and line items.
So I'm going to set this grid to single select.
That's what I
that
did.
way, perfect. Just going to add a button to the form to get rid of this validation issue.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to call the data name selected folder on the parent data grid here on the left.
That's perfect.
And then on the right-hand side, I'm calling the data name child, just because that'll be all the children. I'm going to leave this as info only, but in your case, it sounds like you actually have inline edit, but that shouldn't make a difference for this filtering action.
No. Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go ahead and save this form and close it and set up the input to my flow. So now my form is expecting 2 lists of folders. Before the form loads, I want the left-hand grid to be populated with all of my folders.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm going to just use the flow to do that. And so I'm going to fetch folders. And I'm going to fetch just the root folders on this. I think this will just fetch the root folders by limiting the entity folder ID is null. That'll make it so that it should only return folders that are at the root level.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And this is just simply so it's populated on the form load.
And the childs would be empty, or you can just populate it with the same ones. Maybe it doesn't matter, because I just want to see if the filter works.
In this case, I'm just going to leave it empty until I make a selection. It sounds like in your example, what you would want to do, I think you mentioned you wanted to show all until you make a selection.
Yep.
If I were going to do that, I would just fetch everything and pass that into the child.
Yeah, it's okay. I've done it that way, but for the sake of the example, it's fine. So
yeah, I am definitely simplifying it for this example. And just as a test, I wanted to make sure I've got my folders loading properly at this point. I do. There's some weird names in there, but that's okay. All right, and now I need to edit the form again. And this is where the actual filtering is going to happen. What I'm going to use for filtering that second data grid is a data flow. And so since you're on version 6, I think that active form flows were released in version 7.
Yeah, I don't have that on my.
So in this example, I'm going to go to legacy. In your case, it won't be under legacy, but under legacy, you can still find data flows, and this operates in the same way that they did in 6. So I'm going to add a data flow and call it fetch child folders. And then a data flow always operates off of a flow, so I'm just going to create a new flow of the same name. So this flow is going to take in a folder. It's going to take in the selected folder that was selected on that form. Wrong folder there. And it's going to use that selected folder to fetch all of the child folders. In your case, it would be fetching all the line items given a location. Criteria here is going to be entity folder ID. Entity folder ID is simply the ID of the parent folder that this entity lives in. And that's going to come from that selected folder. So the folder ID of the parent is the entity folder ID of the children. And this flow is going to output a list of all of those child folders.
Okay.
All right, so that's that. This is a very simple example of that flow. And of course, you have the full flow editor in here. You'd be able to do whatever kind of logic you intend to do for your form.
Then update.
To finish the setup here, you click Update Inputs. The input folder is going to come from the selected folder. And I'm checking Run on Value Change. So this will run every time I make a new selection.
Okay.
And the output, I am going to make sure this checks refresh all components listening to this data name. This will make sure that the child data grid is updating when this flow runs. I'm going to leave the name here as flow child folders and click OK. And in order to make sure this data grid is updating from that data name that the data flow is outputting, I'll click Pick from Data for the input data name, and then click on Flow : child folders. That's what the data flow is outputting. I'm going to save that. And at this point, if I run this flow, I think it'll work, but that's what debugging is for. It does look like it's working. So right out of the gate, the first folder was selected called My Apps, and in there you can see the child folders, app details, and history folder there. If you click on System, same thing. This will look kind of like what the folder tree looks like. If you click on the System folder, you see the child elements.
Perfect.
So in your case, you'd have to add a lot more logic and a bit more, and you're using your APIs, but the logic is the same.
I got two questions here. If on the table on the right, okay, the thing is that as I said, I would have two new columns with inputs. It's inline edit, like add quantity and remove quantity. So if I have this, for instance, the first one, they complete something on any of the inputs of the items we got there. Then they click on another one on the table on the left, like, I don't know, demos, and then they complete something on those inputs. And again for another one, and they go back to the first one. I would see those values completed. I mean, these are not resetted when I change I go from one to another one. You understand what I said?
I see. I do understand what you're saying. So this data is all transient on the right-hand side there. By default, no, it won't store the new values that user entered. What's going to happen is when I make another selection, so like if I click on My Apps again, you'll see that this data flow in the debugger, you can see it ran again. It's just running this again, outputting whatever was originally there, and forgetting completely what was in system. So if I made a change here, it wouldn't be persisted. Now
that's what I thought. That's why I said that I thought that this way, that I tried to make it yesterday this way, and I think it wouldn't work for my case because I need to maintain the values, because when they click on the button, I need to save everything no matter what they have filtered on the left. So that's why I think maybe the best way to do this, it's but what I saw, it's maybe I could use an advanced data filter, an advanced data grid, and add a filter there by location, and make it like that, or I don't know if that's the right way to do it, but just thinking out loud.
Well, there's a lot of ways to actually accomplish what you're trying to do here. I think most of them, I can't think of anything off of the top of my head that isn't a little bit more advanced. Like the initial idea I have would probably take more time to demonstrate than I have on this Lunch and Learn right now. But essentially what I'm thinking is you could utilize like the decisions cache service. You'd be able to cache the values that they entered into that data grid. And then your flow, this data flow that's running, instead of just pulling from the database or the API that you mentioned, it could pull from your temporary cache.
Okay.
To get those values that the user entered from memory.
Okay, that's one way. That's one way to go. And
yeah.
Okay.
That's just the first one that came to mind. There may be a better option that wouldn't be as quite as advanced. But it sounds like since you're pulling the data from an API anyway, it may be best to use something like the cache or temporarily, store it in like a temporary database table.
Okay.
Before it gets saved after the form.
To look it on the documentation, it's called like cache service or something like that on the docs.
Exactly. Yeah, we have a set of cache steps. I'll do a search for it. Yeah. Okay. There's a document called cache steps. Essentially what they'll let you do is it's like a key value cache, and you put in a key. You can store an object or a string or whatever as the value, and
perfect.
Retrieve that using the key. So I'm not 100% sure that this is the best approach. This is just one that I'm initially thinking of right off the top of my head.
And sorry, what about the advanced data grid? I said like using directly filters on the advanced data grid. That wouldn't make it work. Maybe forget that we got the table of locations. If I had only the table of line items, which has a column called location that has different locations different line items, one for a related location. If I add a filter called like that, and they could just complete the value of the location and filter that table, that would work, right?
Actually, so with advanced data grids, my experience with them is that they actually operate in the same way that a regular data grid does, but I haven't actually investigated how the filtering works. I know that you have the report engine, which has filtering on it, but I'm not sure that you can use those filters in the same way that you would with just a regular report. I think that the idea behind an advanced data grid is that you essentially use the report editor to define like the columns in the same way that you would for a regular report, but filtering would still be done using a data flow or an active form flow that looks similar to this. Takes in some data, uses that to pass out a list of that type for the advanced data grid.
I understand. There is no way to look for a value inside that table instead of, I always have to call an API, a database or something to filter. I can do it like using only the values on that data grid. Like it was
that's my understanding.
Like it was a JavaScript search, like only complete a value and search inside the table. That can't be done from that way on decisions. That's what I was looking on, because as I said, I come more from programming side, and I thought that could be done like that maybe, but I can try it out anyway. I just wanted to ask if that was a possibility.
Well, let me just take a look at that filter real quick. And see if there's any way to interact with the filter that's on here. Field filter. So I see what you're saying. In this case, this grid would hold every child value, and it's not refreshing the actual values in there. It's just filtering them out. So let me see if there's any way to, since I haven't tried this before. Name. I just want to see if there's any way to pass a value into this filter as an advanced data grid. If there is, that may simplify what you're trying to do. I have an input for the data name, but I don't see an input for the actual that filter value. So yeah, I don't think that these operate. I don't think you can actually do anything with that filter. Which does make me wonder why it's there, other than the fact that this is just using the exact same report editor. Oh, maybe if I set this to runtime editable, save that. Still only an input for the data name. Let me just change the type real quick and see if there's anything else. But I think that my initial guess was correct, that these work in the data-wise, that these advanced data grids work exactly the same as the old style.
As the normal.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. Which would mean your flow would be responsible for providing that functionality that you described of storing the value that the user entered. There may be a more elegant way of doing it than the cache, but if you were to ask me, that's what I would go with.
No, the other way I can think of, it's very like some rudimentary way of doing it, but I was thinking like calling a data flow that would send all the line items along and the selected locations, and then I can, for each those line items, search for the ones that equals the location I've sent, then add those line items to a new array, and then output this new array on that data flow, that would make it like only refresh the values without calling the API directly. But I gotta do some tests there. But I just wanted to ask to see if there was a better way. But I'll check this, and if not, I will try to use the cache service and search if that makes sense. Okay.
Sounds good. Appreciate your question, John. I do know that the functionality you're trying to get, we can certainly make it happen, but like I said, it's a little bit more advanced than I'd be able to get into in this call.
No, it's fine, and I have to get inside a little more. I was sure it was not as simple as doing something quick, so I just wanted to have some insights and the cache service is the best way to start if I can find another way. So I will go with that. Thanks.
Absolutely. Any other questions from other attendees? I don't see any hands raised at this moment, but okay. Alex, got a hand raised from Alex. Could unmute you. Perfect. Go ahead, Alex.
Hi there, Matt. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm well, thanks. I'm just, this is kind of a question about possibly impersonation. I have a flow, and I'm using the current user from the flow data. So
okay.
I'm just trying to see exactly what the actual variable name is. assignment flow. Okay, so the assignment flow is, I'm going in here and I'm looking for flow data dot current account dot user identifier.
Okay.
So I'm trying to figure out what that is because you know, what's going on is I have a flow that requests multiple levels of approvals. So it's like inside of a branch merge flow.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for example, for testing purposes, I want to become all people, you know, kind of thing, so that I know if it's assigned to user A, B, C, and D. First, I log on as A, do the approval. Then I notice that B gets their assignment. I log on as B. Okay, and so onto the form where they're actually sending this, where they're doing their approval, I'm passing in this flow data dot current account dot user identifier, so that I can figure out who it is that they are, and you know, basically, I use that to pass into an Active Directory validation step, you know, inside our, you know, through the agent and all that sort of stuff. But the thing that I was doing some testing the other day, and I found something odd, because all my testing so far, the current account dot user identifier would always be me. And that made sense to me, you know, because I'm the person that's impersonating. So I'm really the person, the current account dot user identifier. So does that make sense so far?
Yeah, so definitely current user ID is you, because that's who you're logged in as, is what you're saying, right?
Yeah. So,
Okay.
but the weird thing is that when I got into multiple levels of approval, so I would log in as A, that was fine. And then I would log in as B, it was fine, it would show me. I log in as C, and it showed me the user B as the current account dot user identifier. And so I'm kind of confused about this. I mean, I did everything under the sun, including restarting the instance to try and make sure that this just wasn't a browser caching issue.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm just kind of confused as to what's going on here. How the current account dot user identifier can change, you know, by impersonating different people.
And you're talking, when you say impersonating, you're talking about this specific feature of, oh, I don't have it on here because I don't have any impersonations, but there's a login as button here if you set up account impersonation.
Yeah, like
Or are
you
you
can
talking
put
about?
there, you can say the drop down menu says login as.
Gotcha. Okay.
I mean, I'm on you're in version 7. Yeah, so here, this is where, you know, I go into the accounts and I basically set myself up as an impersonator for all the accounts that I'm interested in using. And then on my drop down menu, I have that you know, thing where it allows me to log in as somebody.
Gotcha. Okay. And you're saying up until a certain point, no matter what, it was always using your account as the current user ID, regardless of who you're impersonating.
Who I was impersonating, but then after a certain, like on the third level down, it actually chose the user that who was one level before them.
That sounds like it's probably a defect. That doesn't sound right. I do think if you're impersonating someone, that Decisions is intended to use that impersonation's account as the current user ID, so that, you know, of course, you could move forward as that person if you're impersonating them. But what sounds like the issue is that it wasn't doing that, and then when it was like one step behind, meaning the current user was actually, you know, the user who's in the previous approval. Is that right?
Yeah, so I mean, the thing is that there's no level of consistency here whatsoever, because I would think that, you know, if it were doing a lockstep thing, then when I logged in as user number 2, it would show me user number 1. But it doesn't do that. It waits until I get to user number 3 to show me user number 2. Now, I mean, there is some, the thing is that because it's a branch merge flow, like I pass in a data structure of users and levels, okay? So multiple people will approve at one level before the next group of people get called, kind of speak. So one of the things that I did notice is that it works properly when we're at the first level. So for those two people at the first level, I am the current user. And then when I pass to the next level, seems to be the last person that was used at the previous level. Anyway, I'm just kind of curious whether or not there's anything known around like limitations with while doing impersonations.
Are you passing into your approval flow you said you have like some object that keeps track of the current user and the level, and you're not using the flow data dot current user ID directly?
No, I am. So like that's I mean, I specifically used the flow data.currentaccount.useridentifier because I thought that's what, because this is Active Directory authentication, it's not useful to me if I actually become the person that is being requested to do the approval, because I don't know their password. Which is why I used flow data.currentaccount.useridentifier, because I thought in impersonation that would pick me, and in real life it would pick them.
I think it's supposed to pick like the value of and I can test this really quick, but the value of that current user ID should be the impersonated account, not the impersonator. It doesn't sound like it's doing either one of those correctly in your case, but
well, yeah. So there's a level of inconsistency regardless of what was going on. But again, I mean, I'm going to test this out, but I have to bother people to test it. So that's why I was, hoping to get around this, because I want to see using the current account.useridentifier whether it works properly when actual people are logging into decisions and doing their own, approvals kind of thing. And whether or not it's just something that is, related to impersonation. So I can go down that path before, I guess then the next point would be to submit a support ticket to find out what the expected behavior is and what's actually going on.
Correct. Yeah, if it is a defect, and it sounds like what you're describing, it may be a defect in the impersonation. And I think it may be partly related to the branching and merging too. Like there might be a level of complexity in your flow that there may be more than one, component that are pulling out that defect from impersonations.
Right.
But just as a quick test, let me just, and you can tell me if this is actually, testing what we're talking about here, but I'm going to have a flow that just shows a pop-up, and it's going to show the current user email address. And actually, I'll do current user ID, and I'll run it just now as myself, and we should see my account's ID. And then I'll impersonate some account, and we'll see if it's my account ID or that impersonated account ID.
Right.
That'll at least tell us, what it'll give me a better idea of what is expected from impersonation. My hypothesis is that it should show when I'm impersonating an account, it will show that account's ID.
Okay.
And what you're saying though is that it's actually typically showing always your account ID. And in fact, that's what you would want in your case. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so I've got this having current user ID.
Yeah, so okay, that's fine. I'm using current account.useridentifier, but
well, that'll be interesting to see if there's any difference between those two. So let me do both actually. So I'll do I'll leave this one as the
right.
current user ID. And I'm just gonna add another pop-up for the current account. Current account and then account ID. Or are you saying user ID?
Use it. What's it called? It's called user identifier. Right there. No, you passed it. No. It's
I just
not
started scrolling
alphabetical
real
for some
fast.
reason. So scroll
Yeah.
right to the bottom there, I think is where you were. And then
Here we go.
yeah.
Okay. So let me change this pop-up to, well, actually, I may not have, well, I didn't even select account. Okay. All right, so I'm gonna run that. Current account.userid is null. Actually, that makes sense because my current account doesn't have a user ID. So let me go to security. I'm gonna update my account with a user ID. And I'm gonna allow myself to impersonate Morgan while I'm in the security folder. And I'll give Morgan's account a user ID as well. I'm gonna clear all those just so I can get the proper one. So Matt's ID and current user ID is this. I'm just gonna copy and paste it into a note. I may need to refresh to allow that impersonation. Log in as Morgan, impersonate. So now I'm impersonating Morgan, and I'm gonna go run that flow again. Morgan's ID and this, oops. I'm just gonna compare this to the other one that I saved in the note. It's different. I'm gonna assume that's Morgan's account ID on this server.
Yeah. So the UUID is different than the previous one. Yeah.
So both of these, both of those identifiers seem to change when I start impersonating.
I would agree with that.
And in your case,
so
it sounds like you're not seeing exactly that.
Yeah, so I'll do the same test because, like as I say, you're up there in the 7s. I'm down in the 618.
Okay.
So
Yeah, I'm on the latest 7. Things could have changed.
So
there's
I'll
one other thing that
I'll check out that particular test, and then also, as I say, I'll check out whether or not this odd behavior persists when real people are, being themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And then and then I'll probably open a support ticket if there doesn't if there's no kind of consistency and all that.
Okay. There's one other bit of information that may help, and this is, honestly, this is my own hypothesis. I don't actually know for sure that this is exactly what's happening in the back end, but from my experience, this is how things seem to work around that user context in a flow and, under flow data, the current account. Take it with a grain of salt because I don't actually know how this is working in the back end, but I think that there's a few key points in flows that user context changes. Obviously, when the flow is first executed, it will update that current user ID, like that current account in the flow data, to whoever ran the flow. As you could see in the impersonation, it will use your impersonated account. But that won't change in the flows context until certain types of steps hit. So one thing that'll change the current context is an assignment. So all the way up in a flow up until an assignment, it may be one user, and then once it hits that assignment, that user context will change when the new user who's assigned accesses their assignment. At that point, and after the assignment, the context is switched.
Okay.
There's another thing that'll change it, which is like an end form or an end form session. That'll change the user context back to system. So there's no actual real user, it's just the system account. So that may be playing in there too if you've got assignments, depending on when you're like getting the value of that current user, if it's before or after assignment, that could be impacting, you know, who the user is that you're seeing. Like if you've impersonated an account, opened up an assignment as that user, it wouldn't be until after that assignment in the flow that context would have changed.
Okay.
And then all the way up until that, after the next assignment, it will be that user. That could be why it's one behind, but this is a total wild guess.
Right.
Figured I might as well throw it out there in case that sort of matches what you're seeing.
Okay, perfect.
Cool.
Appreciate that.
Absolutely, yeah, no problem. And of course, if you're seeing an issue, that's a good support thing. That's a defect. If it's doing as you're describing, it sounds like we need to work out impersonations around branching and merging.
Right. Well, actually, you know, it's sort of now that I'm thinking of it in the context of branching and merging, things are making a little bit more sense, because one of the things that I was trying to do initially in the branch merge flow was to actually depend on the current user's email. And one of the things that I noticed is that it wasn't updating properly as it went through the various iterations of the branch merge. So I actually ended up having to add a hidden text box to the actual approval form, where I would at the branch merge flow level, I would actually populate you know, some data that would allow the current email to be properly kind of you know, properly passed on from approval to approval or assignment to assignment.
Okay, so yeah, maybe
it's all
depending
related
on
to that sort of stuff.
yeah,
Okay.
like where it is in the flow in relationship to those assignments could have some impact on that.
Right. Okay.
Okay, well, we've got 7 minutes left. If anybody has a quick question, I could probably get to that. I don't see any hands raised. Feel free to throw them up if you do have something. Otherwise, if I don't see any questions or hands, I will go ahead and close it out at this point.
Okay, great. Thanks, Matt.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex. Thanks, everybody, for joining Lunch and Learn. Of course, you know, we do Monday through Thursday at noon Eastern time. So hope to see you again at some point. Otherwise, have a good rest of your day, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, Matt.